All right. Welcome. Glad to see so many people here. It's first time organizing such an event, so very excited. So I'm going to be talking about domain-driven design plus data leads to insights, maybe. This talk is a little bit like I'm not trying to stand here and be some kind of expert in this. This is something I was introduced to just about half a year ago. And it was very interesting, and I've been uh, digging into it a bit more, and just wanted to share some thoughts, see if there is anyone who has worked with it before and have thoughts about it, or maybe if you have an alternative to it. I'll go through it and we'll see what we end up with. So before going into that, hi, my name is Johnny, as presented. I'm just a ordinary data practitioner. I don't know what to call it anymore because um, I've been in roles where the title has been like data scientist or data engineer, but it's almost always ended up being like all kinds of things, sitting in Excel, working in some kind of S3 bucket, or analyzing data on my local computer, or some kind of a Spark cluster. It's very varied. It's very fun, and yeah, that's kind of who I am. So let's get into a little bit of introduction why I'm holding this talk. It's throughout my years working with data, it's become kind of a pattern where you work with data and you think you understand the kind of the concepts of what you're trying to analyze. If whether it's a website and you're trying to analyze the performance of your company, or how many customers that are using your service, or whatever it can be, but it always kind of feels like I never get this full understanding. There is always something lacking. Things are just not meshing together. So that's where I kind of got introduced to this domain-driven design, more in the context of trying to transform a legacy application into a modern architecture, kinda, but with the added benefit that it also introduces the whole concept of data modeling. And I think that's something that rarely comes up as a core part of your technical of the discussions when you talk about your application. It's more like a technical detail. It's a diagram, you have your data model, this relates to that, but you don't really like it's often very disconnected from what, for example, the finance people talk about, or what the marketing people talk about. So there is always some kind of layer of translation between those. So just as an agenda, I just want to start by setting up kind of an example case of what I mean when I talk about confusion about data and where things can go wrong in my experience. A little bit of a mix of various cases from my experience. And then I'm going to go into just a short overview of domain-driven design. How many actually knows of domain-driven design in any capacity? Like, have you heard about it? Have you worked with it? Um, all right, all right. And then lastly, I'm gonna just kind of pose this open question, like, how do we use this? I have, as I said, only used it in the context of moving a legacy application into kind of a modern architecture, but I hope that we can, um, in Swedish you say, slå våra kloka huvuden tillsammans, and see if we can find something out of it. So let's get into the example case. So imagine that you're working at a place called Amazon. You're the world's largest provider of fine dining ham, especially bacon. Um, and you're working as a data practitioner of some kind, data engineer probably, and you're the only data person there. So Amazon, being the world's largest provider for fine dining ham, they obviously have a website where you can buy their products. They have all kinds of ham-related products, whatever you can think of. And to increase the customer engagement, they also have a kind of a 3-tier system for customers. Technically 4, because you can be none of them, but we'll get into that. So here are kind of the tiers. It's just a very simple example. You have bronze, silver, gold. These are just fictional. It doesn't really matter, but It's more about the fact that there are different requirements to get into these various stages, and obviously there is a fourth category when you are not at once, but that's kind of part of the problem. Hint, hint. And the data kind of looks like this. The backend team, they thought like, okay, but why do we actually need to store the rankings? We can always calculate it whenever we need it. Since it's only based on how much they bought, we can always look up customer, how much have they ordered, and when they log into the website, they just check, oh, how much have they ordered since last month, and lifetime value. Sorry, I didn't explain. LTV means lifetime value. Not super necessary for this talk, but it's just how much value the customer has generated for the company. So this is just a short what is called summary, like the most important things for what I'm talking about. So you have the customer ID, the name, email, street address to be able to send the order. And you have for each order, you also have like the order value and order date. Obviously not complete. There is a lot of more things that you need. But then with this data, as a data person, you might have data requests from various parts of your company. Like let's say the CMO wants to know how many customers do we have of each ranking last month. And as a data person, you think like, oh, but that's easy. I just need to kind of do whatever they're doing in the back end. But that leads to kind of weird situations where they might update something and change the logic, change what the requirements of how to get into one of these rankings. And then suddenly for you as a data practitioner, you have to remember, oh, on the 1st of January, we changed the system. So customers that bought things before that are in gold at that time, but if you're after that time, and then every time they change, you as a the backend team don't really have to remember this. They have it in code, but they only need to take care of the current requirement, while you as a data person might need to think about this kind of forever. Secondly, we also these questions are kind of all having the same symptoms of how do you as a data person keep up with all the changes in the business logic, actually. The last one is has an extra dimension to it. How many monthly active users do we have? Because then you introduce a new concept of a user. What does a user mean for our company? Does it mean that they have been on the website? How does it mean people that have bought something the last 90 days? Or what can that mean? And that leads to, once again, some translation, some friction between the rest of the company and the tech part or data person in many cases. I have been burned so many times where we talk about a customer, but it depends on who I'm talking with. If it's with the CMO, it might be how many users have entered the website and clicked on a certain number of buttons. While with the CPO, the Chief Product Officer, they might say, oh, but it's anyone who has done anything on our website, no matter how many times they've done it. So you have this mismatch between the different words. And that's where kind of we come into domain-driven design, where the focus of domain-driven design is that you want to focus on the domain. Obviously, that's circle argument. But the whole point is that you want to put in complex systems, like this is mostly for complex systems where your domain, where the business logic is complex enough that that's kind of the hardest part. If you, for example, compare with Twitter, it's in concept quite an easy thing. You have short messages and you send it to everyone. So it's quite easy to talk about it, but at least in the beginning. Now they have all kinds of things added on top of it, so I don't really know anymore. I don't use Twitter, unfortunately. Or maybe fortunately. Anyways, but for them, the problem is instead in a technical sense, where how do you scale a service like that into millions of messages every minute, every hour, making sure that everyone gets timely updates. So that's not the problem with the domain. It's more about the technical standards. But domain-driven design is perfect when your domain is complicated instead. And yeah, but before I continue, let's just kind of there are many different concepts that are related to domain-driven design. Some are more technical about like how do you implement it and how do you the technical specification and tactical design details and stuff. But these are more the strategic, open-ended, more soft, if I may use that term, concepts. So the first one, domain. Second, model, ubiquitous language. And lastly, bounded context. So domain. This is a quote. So before I continue, there is kind of one Bible book for this concept written by Eric Evans. It's sometimes known as the Big Blue Book. That kind of started this whole area of software design. And I have a couple of quotes from that book. I haven't read it myself, but it's more like third-hand quotes. So for domain, he writes of it as a sphere of knowledge, influence, or activity. The subject area to which the user applies a program is the domain of the software. It's a very vague, but it kind of needs to be vague because it encompasses so many different things. But conceptually, how I think of it is more just in what context does your application exist? What are the problems it's trying to solve? What are the laws around it? What are the regulations? What are best practices? What is needed for your application to be able to exist? And what is the kind of the problem space as well? And then you have a model. And this is where you come into more data-related things, where you talk about a system of abstractions representing selected aspects of a domain. A model distills knowledge and assumptions about a domain. So what that means is that just like anything else, when we do programming, we always abstract things. We can never do a realistic implementation of something. If we were to implement a farm as a program, we don't want to have every single error. We don't care about a lot of details. We kind of shave off everything until only the bare necessities are left. And in domain-driven design, that this is kind of the most central thing, that you have a model that is designed for your specific purpose. It doesn't need to, like, the goal should never be completeness. It's more about, does your model do what you need it to do? Does it have all the things that you need to know to be able to do your job, so to speak? And next we have, and this relates to the ubiquitous language, where it relates back to what I was talking about before with users and customers, and we need to have a ubiquitous language. A language structured around the domain model and used by all team members within a bounded context to connect all the activities of the team with the software. It has a few different aspects. The important part is that all team members, not only the dev team, but also the marketing people, the finance people, we all need to know and speak the same language. This translates also back to the code. So whatever, for example, the marketing or support team talks about, when they say a customer, it needs to be reflected in the code as well. If they say we need to have Bacon Friday is a thing, then that should, like, if that's a business logic rule that every Friday it's Bacon Friday, we need to sell extra bacon or whatever it could be, discounts, then that needs to be reflected in the code as well, so that we minimize this friction that comes from translating your code when you talk from the developers, the software developers, to the domain experts. And another important thing is also this bounded context, because um, it's only within a specific context that words mean something. Otherwise, you don't really know what we're referring to. So, in domain-driven design, it's important to have a specific bounded context for your words. Just as a quote, the setting in which a word or statement appears that determines its meaning. Statements about a model can only be understood in a context. So that means if I were to say, um, get me that pig, what does that mean? Well, like, if I just say that, without any context, you have no idea. But it could mean if we're in a on a farm, obviously, it's like get that pig to me. But it could also be that you're that was a bad example. An image could also be get me that pig. No. But it could also be, for example, if you're calling someone a pig, like someone is behaving like a pig, then you can like get me that pig. I'm gonna punish him. Some whatever. Bad example, but I hope you understand the kind of the meaning of it. So all of this together, it's very abstract. So um, I remember now that I forgot to add some more. Anyways, I'll just describe it. So, for example, let's put this into kind of a little practice. So think of a map, a world map. That's a world map is kind of a projection of the world. We uh, within the domain of trying to visualize Earth, let's say, you create a model of Earth in different ways. You can have different models, and different models have different uses. The usual world map I think most people are used to is called the Mercator map, which is a projection that enables directions to be preserved. So if you on a map see, okay, I just need to go angle 245 on the map, and then look at your compass, you can follow that compass and you will end up on that spot that you looked at in the map. The problem with the Mercator, and that was very useful for sailors, for example. So that map was mainly for sailors so that they knew how to get from point A to point B on the sea where you don't really have any features that you can use. So instead you use a compass and various other things I guess, I don't know anything about sailing, so, but you have tools, I guess. But but if you want to, for example, compare sizes of countries, then the Mercator projection is quite bad, because if you think back to a world map, Greenland usually looks huge on it. It looks about the same size as Africa. And in actuality, in reality, Africa is about 15 times bigger than Greenland. But because of the projection, it's not very useful for comparing sizes. There are other projections, now I forgot the name of it, but that are more useful for that. So you have a model that distills the important facts about it. Another aspect in this example is also that you have, even with these different projections, you can still from the Mercator projection, find the difference in size between countries. It's just that you have to do more calculations. It makes it harder to do that work. While in another projection, you can make it easier. And then there are also some things that are impossible to do. You cannot, from a world map, know how many people live in a certain area. That's not what it's for, but you could probably create a map that is more designed around that. Yeah, that's kind of it. And then lastly, yeah, I just went through the whole example. I forgot to change the page, but in essence, and why I find this very interesting is that in business, there is very often a mismatch between what developers do, what they code, how they code it, how they call things, and how the non-technical people call it. And that, as a data person, like, it already creates friction when you want to have specifications or requirements for developing a new feature, but it adds another even more layer for data practitioners, because then you always need to keep in mind what these different terms mean. So I'm hoping that um, that kind of want to make the use of domain driven, like raise the, in essence, the domain data modeling, to put it into the center of development as well. So that's kind of my talk. Um, any questions? Any thoughts? Well, how have you done with, like, have you guys ever suffered from kind of bad data modeling? And how have you kind of worked with it? If I may ask the audience.
I have a counter question in that case. I
Yeah,
assume I can't hear myself, so it's only for the recording.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's
because
only
it
for the
feels really
recording.
weird that I'm holding a microphone and nothing happening. Hello. Maybe. No, I was. I guess the tricky part is how to succeed in cooperating across the entire domain, across all different functions. I guess that's the tricky part. What are your ideas around that? Like, how does a dev team work with the marketing, with the sales, and yada yada? How do you succeed there?
Well, there are different ways. Like, there is no one sure silver bullet for this, but very often when you want to start doing domain-driven development, you kind of, it starts by doing various workshops. One of them, a common one, is event storming, where you invite all the domain experts, kind of, yeah, all the stakeholders that are related to your application, and ask them, what do you like? What happens? What do you expect should happen in the application? And then you take out all the kind of the verbs, all the subjects, and so on, to make sure that you are at least on the same page for that. And an important aspect in this domain-driven design is also that as soon as the language changes in the company, the code should also change in tandem, because otherwise you're not synchronized with the domain. I don't know if there. Yeah, I hope that kind of answered some part of it.
I have another question if nobody else has something. Uh, and how do you split the domains? I mean, is there such a thing as too many domains, too few domains, and who is to? Do you have like domain leaders, and
Oh,
what's the difference between domain and products? Do you have multiple products within a domain?
that's a good question, and here comes my inexperience. And so what I know, at least from the experience when we try to implement this, is there is also a problem in hierarchy between domain and bounded context, because what do you define the domain as? Should we have subdomains? Should we have sub-bounded context? I think that's more of an art rather than a science. The important thing, I think, is to have thought about it, and trying to make sure that you have split up so that it makes sense for everyone working with it. When you start talking about, like, if you feel like there is a lot of friction when you need to explain something for someone that should already know what's kind of happening, then I guess you can you can feel that there is a mismatch. But otherwise, I don't really have an answer.
So I can start off by saying that, I mean, I recognize myself a lot here. Uh, do you have any idea on how to stop this from turning into an abbreviation farm? Because I feel a lot of the times when I stumble onto this, you figure out a keyword that you've seen somewhere else, that some other company maybe uses, or that's more widely regarded online. But then you realize that it doesn't quite fit what you want to do within your domain, and you create a new abbreviation for it. And in the end, no one can follow along because you've become an abbreviation farm, and then you need to document all of this somewhere.
So I think for that, I'm not entirely sure where the. Are you saying that the abbreviation is coming from the team, for the dev team, from the company, from outside? Where does the abbreviation come from, you mean?
Anywhere in the domain, but within the domain still. So either the
Mm.
dev or marketing or the data team,
Mm.
somewhere within the domain.
I think that kind of relates back to having ubiquitous language. As long as everyone is speaking the same language, it shouldn't be a problem. Like obviously, if you're coming from outside and into that domain, it's going to be a big hurdle if you have a lot of acronyms. But what like I don't think that matters if it's an acronym or not if you're new to the domain. So if we exclude that kind of situation, if you have a lot of acronyms that are hard to understand, then you kind of fail, I guess, with the ubiquitous language. It should always reflect what people are actually talking and how they're talking and how they think about it. The dev team is only there to kind of enable it and make sure that it is there, while it is the kind of the domain experts that decide how it should be working. Obviously, this is not a hard line. For example, I worked my previous company. I worked at Blutryck Stockholm. It's a healthcare service, digital healthcare service. The problem is that there is no real domain expert in that. It's a new field. What does it even mean? Like, does the doctor know how a digital healthcare should work? No, not really. Does the developers know? Not really, because they're not doctors. So it it becomes kind of a mishmash where people will have to hash it out. But I think just like with most other things, that it's an iterative process that you kind of notice when things go go haywire. I hope. Um, hmm?
Anyone else?
Surprise. You said that if something changes within a domain, it should be reflected all over the place. But I guess for to succeed within this, maybe you shouldn't change that often. You would want to like find some sort of middle way where you don't actually change definitions or slice off parts of the domain or add new things to domains too often, because then I guess if it's too changing, it would just cause confusion. It would be impossible to be consistent within all the different people and the different functions within
Hmm.
that domain. So I guess it's just a reflection more than a
Yeah.
question, I guess. But
Yeah. I think on that note, you kind of it's a little bit of a circle argument because and I don't really know how to resolve it. But if the domain evolves at a a high speed, then kind of the code will also like it's not the code that decides what changes. If the domain is changing fast because of business demands or whatever it could be, then it's not coming from the code. So I don't think it's ever going to be a problem in that sense that it's going too fast, because then the whole business is going too fast somehow. Yeah. But another thing, when you talk about the whole organization, like that's where it's important to think about the bounded contexts. Where, for example, an example could be a flight. Um, as a passenger, a flight starts kind of when you get on the plane and when you get off the plane. So for when you talk about passengers, flights are the start and stop. But for the air crew that are working on the airport, it's different. It's the other way around. For them, a flight is when they come in, so they can unload the luggage, clean up in the airplane, and then the airplane leaves. So they have another boundary, like a flight for them means something else. So even in the same organization, you will have many different definitions, and you always have to be aware of which context you're speaking in, which context you're using the word in. So it's not going to be the same definition over the whole organization. Ooh.
So, is this a change that must come from top, or is it somehow possible to start from bottom?
In my experience, I would say that it's, if I may translate it into kind of like from the bottom, I would see as more of a iterative change, small steps. Like a developer can always just kind of, when I write the code, I can just make small changes that fits more into. Would that make sense for your question, or?
I'm just thinking, like, wouldn't you have a issue that you might create multiple domains from multiple teams then? Then they would clash because you have created different domains,
Well, like
which overlaps.
I think I think for like as long as they're each team when they're interacting with the other other stakeholders, they have different domain experts. So I can't really think of an example for this, but even for example in a banking company, you have different kinds of different parts of the bank. You have the loan part, but you also have the investment part, and you maybe have the stock index part. So there are probably going to be different domains, but within each domain, you have your domain experts that know how to know how they speak within that domain, and then you, as developer or as the organization within or department, will have to decide how to speak in that. But otherwise, I don't really know. I haven't had the opportunity to try it from a large organization. But yeah, I hope that answered a little bit of it. Yeah.
Medium.
With that said, being the time police.
Thank you guys for listening.